the most unusual Nazi operation carried out in the West during the Second World War was perhaps the deployment of commandos dressed in American uniforms to roam the French countryside. It sounds like an episode of The Twilight Zone. But it happened. On September 3, 1944, a group of German paratroopers led by Otto von Bulge landed near Marseille in southern France. Their mission: rescue Mussolini from Allied captivity. As Allied troops closed in, Mussolini's Italian partisans fell back to the hills, regrouping for a last stand against their German liberators. Or at least that's what the Italians thought had happened. In reality, the Germans weren't there to rescue anyone. Instead, they were part of one of the strangest operations of the entire war, codenamed Greif or Grey Wolf. Their commander was SS Hauptsturmführer Otto Skorzeny, whose elite commandos infiltrated France, disguised in US uniforms, wreaking havoc behind enemy lines. They changed road signs, blew up bridges, spread false rumors, and even released fabricated Allied to local newspapers before vanishing into thin air. They struck fear into the hearts of the very troops they were sent to fight, confusing them into thinking they were being attacked by elite American commandos. But who exactly were these commandos? And how did they pull off one of the most audacious operations of the war? Skorzeny's commandos were nothing if not highly trained. By the summer of 1944, Germany's regular army was exhausted after years of fighting on multiple fronts. But Hitler still wanted to keep up the fight. He knew his conventional forces were no match for the Western Allies, so he turned to special operations. That September, he established a special unit under the command of Skorzeny with two simple objectives: conduct sabotage missions behind Allied lines and demoralize the enemy. Skorzeny wasted no time getting started. On October 29, 1944, his men went into action. Most of the commandos were disguised as American paratroopers, complete with authentic uniforms, weapons and equipment taken from recently captured or killed US soldiers. Others posed as members of the French resistance, and some were even dressed as civilians. All of them were experts in demolition, infiltration, and disguise. And all of them had one thing in common: they hated the Americans. Some because they were ardent Nazis, and others because they'd faced the full force of the Red Army on the Eastern Front, and blamed America's entry into the war on the disastrous German invasion of the Soviet Union. Skorzeny's first mission was around Lyon in eastern France, where his commandos spread false rumors that elements of the US First Army were defecting to the Germans, and that partisan groups were mass surrendering to the Other teams struck at key infrastructure. Near Marseille, they blew up railway lines used to transport Allied troops and supplies. Across the region, they spread leaflets claiming that the area would soon be liberated by elite American commandos known as the Black Ghosts. These leaflets were designed to confuse the enemy and instill terror in their ranks. Some were actually dropped from planes over Allied positions, while others were attached to small rockets that streaked through the night sky like fiery meteors. Whatever the method of delivery, the result was always the same: total confusion. Allied troops found the abandoned uniform of an American sergeant near the scene of one explosion, and it wasn't until later that they realized it was fake. Many of Skorzeny's commandos spoke passable English, adding to the deception. It wasn't just infrastructure that was targeted. One commando team seized 2 fishing boats and rowed out to Allied naval vessels anchored in the Garand estuary near Bordeaux, waving white flags. They approached the ships and shouted that they had important information about German defenses in the area. Once on board, they revealed their true colors and attempted to seize the vessels. Although they failed to capture any ships, they did manage to blow up several smaller boats. Perhaps the most audacious operation was the theft of an American Jeep. Skorzeny's men drove it right up to the entrance of a US officers' club in Marseille, parked it next to the real vehicle, and then switched the license plates. When an unsuspecting American lieutenant got into the Jeep, he was driven straight into the waiting arms of the Commandos. He was interrogated, then executed. Other Commandos left dead or wounded in their wake. But it wasn't long before the Allies caught on to what was happening. Many of the vehicles and uniforms used by the Commandos were stolen from genuine US soldiers, meaning forensic teams could often link the attacks to German sabotage. Intelligence officers began tracking down leads, and eventually the Americans managed to capture one of Skorzeny's spies. They extracted information about the other Commandos and their activities, and then released him in a double cross. Meanwhile, Skorzeny and his men continued their campaign of terror across France. His personal command group even made it all the way to Paris. There, they published forged orders from General Charles de Gaulle in the local newspaper, L'Ordre, calling for the city's defense against an imminent Anglo-Saxon invasion. The plan was to spark a riot amongst the French population, which would weaken the city's defenses and allow German troops to recapture Paris. It didn't work, and instead, the forged decree merely confused the citizens of Paris and annoyed de Gaulle. Undeterred, Skorzeny's commandos continued their reign of terror until late November, when they vanished from occupied France, having completed 6 major sabotage missions and dozens of lesser ones. They crossed into Germany ahead of the advancing Allies and regrouped in SS uniform. Now wearing their real uniforms, they continued to carry out missions behind enemy lines until the end of the war. Most of them were killed in battle, but some survived. One of them was Józef Kaczynski, a Polish member of the Polish Home Army, who deserted to the Germans after fighting against them on the Eastern Front. On January 2, 1945, he was captured by British troops near Aachen in western Germany. Kaczynski was flown to London for interrogation, where he revealed everything he knew about Operation Greif. While he was being held in a British camp in Surrey, Kaczynski met another captured commando, Joseph M. Burgard. Burgard was born in Alsace and fought in the French Foreign Legion before joining the Germans in 1940. He claimed to have been a member of Skorzeny's inner circle, but according to Kaczynski, he was really an alcoholic who couldn't remember anything about his missions. Both men were held in custody until the end of the war, when they were finally tried for war crimes. Kaczynski was accused of killing 2 British sergeants after mistaking them for commandos, while Burgard was charged with posing as a member of the French resistance and murdering several French citizens. However, both men were cleared of all charges, much to the fury of the press and the public alike. After all, they were hardly POWs who could be reasonably expected to resist interrogation. They were elite Nazi commandos who'd been trained to infiltrate and deceive. What's more, they'd been given immunity for their past crimes in exchange for their services. Skorzeny himself was captured near Linz in Austria in May 1945. During his interrogation by US officials, he boasted that his commandos had killed around 250 Allied troops and caused millions of dollars worth of damage to military and civilian targets. In his mind, he'd done nothing wrong and was simply a soldier carrying out his orders. He was tried in absentia by a US military court and sentenced to 20 years in prison. After the war, Skorzeny worked for the West German government before becoming a successful businessman. He lived to be 87, dying in 2007. Despite their capture and subsequent release, the surviving commandos were forever branded as war criminals. It was later revealed that they'd murdered hundreds of French civilians suspected of collaborating with the enemy. To this day, they remain a controversial figure in military history. Operation Greif was never repeated. Not only did the commandos commit serious war crimes, they also proved to be too expensive to deploy. The custom uniforms, Weapons and vehicles cost tens of thousands of dollars, money that could have been better spent elsewhere. But that hasn't stopped modern militaries from attempting to replicate their methods. Today, special operations forces routinely wear enemy uniforms to infiltrate their camps and gather intelligence. Even better, they can now make perfect replicas of enemy vehicles, thanks to 3D printing technology. So, although we may never see commandos dressed as US soldiers roaming the streets of Paris again, the idea has certainly not been forgotten.